The grand hall shimmered under countless floating orbs, casting soft light across the polished floors. Every corner whispered wealth, power, and centuries of tradition. Yet despite the opulence, the air felt cold, almost hostile, too. He stood at the edge of the hall, human among aliens, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes on him. He had been invited, not by choice, but by circumstance. The royal family, intrigued by stories of humans' resilience, had requested his presence. It was supposed to be an honor. For him, it felt like a trial. At the far end of the hall, she waited. Princess, 24 years old, her emerald eyes sharp and calculating, studied him like a predator assessing prey. Her laugh had already echoed through the hall hours before, a sound that seemed to mock every nervous thought harbored. "A human," she had whispered loudly enough for her entourage to hear. "I suppose the legends were true. They are smaller than I imagined." Her words stung, not because of the insult, but because of the certainty in them. She had decided, before even meeting him, that he was beneath her notice. Straightened his shoulders, forcing his nerves into a rigid calm. He had been trained for diplomacy, for situations like this, though nothing in his military or scientific career had prepared him for being the object of ridicule by an alien princess. Every step he took toward her was measured, careful, but his heart hammered against his ribs like a drum signaling a coming war. The entourage of a mixture of generals, scholars, and nobles whispered and pointed, their voices a low hum of amusement and curiosity. Caught fragments of their comments primitive, curious species. He might actually survive a day. None of it mattered. He had learned from his years on Earth to survive on grit and patience rather than words. And patience was exactly what he needed now. When he finally stopped a few meters from her, his expression sharpened. Her lips curled into a faint, cruel smile. "You must be the human who believes he can match brilliance," she said, her tone dripping with mockery. "How amusing! I wonder how long it will take for you to realize your insignificance." She leaned back slightly, crossing her long arms as if daring him to respond. Looked past her, letting his calm demeanor speak for him. He said nothing, only inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement. Silence in a room full of nobles can be louder than any scream, and the room shifted uncomfortably at his restraint. Whispers turned to raised eyebrows, and smile faltered just a fraction, though she quickly covered it with a small, dismissive laugh. Days passed like this. Attended gatherings, sat through meetings filled with alien science and politics he barely understood, and endured endless jabs veiled as humor. Each insult from was meant to break him, to make him flinch, yet he did not. He observed her, studied her movements, the way she held herself above everyone else, the way she expected compliance and submission from those around her. He saw cracks in the perfection she presented, a brief hesitation, a shadow of doubt when no one else noticed, but he kept it to himself. One evening, after a particularly sharp encounter, walked alone through the palace gardens. The twin moons hung low, casting silver light over alien flora that shimmered with bioluminescent colors. The air was thick with scents strange to him, yet strangely comforting. He touched the smooth, glowing petals of a flower and allowed himself a moment of vulnerability. He missed Earth. He missed a world where words carried simpler weight and where actions spoke louder than noble titles. Yet even in that solitude, he did not allow himself despair. He knew humans had a strength unlike anything the galaxy had witnessed. It was subtle, quiet, often overlooked, but it was relentless. It was what had brought him here. He reminded himself that every mockery, every sneer from only underscored her arrogance. And arrogance, he had learned, was a weakness he could exploit, but only with patience. That night, as the palace slumbered, returned to his chambers. He did not speak, did not brood. Instead, he planned. The princess might have thought him weak, small, insignificant, but he had learned to let others underestimate him. In the stillness of alien silence, resolved that he would not fight with loud words or visible defiance. He would let his actions, unseen and quiet, speak louder than any insult. He would remind them all what it meant to be human. And deep in her chambers, Princess stared at all of his movements earlier that day. She had mocked him, yes, but there was something in his composure, something that refused to bend under her gaze, that made her uneasy. She didn't know why, but the thought of the human's silent strength lingered longer than any of her laughter. The following morning, the palace was alive with activity. Nobles, attendants, and guards moved in perfect synchronization, as if the very walls demanded order. However, walked through the corridors not as a visitor, but as someone silently claiming space in a world that was not built for him. His presence did not scream confidence, it whispered it. And yet, every whisper of his calm unsettled those who thought humans were inferior. Watched from her balcony as entered the grand training hall. Today, the princess had decided to entertain herself with a demonstration of her own combat prowess. She moved with fluid precision, every motion measured, every strike lethal. Yet the moment stepped into the hall, the rhythm of her display seemed to shift, almost imperceptibly. He did not speak. He did not flinch. He simply observed, his human eyes tracking her movements with quiet curiosity. "Do you even understand what you are watching?" she called, her voice sharp and cutting through the echoes of clashing weapons. "This is not a game, human, this is pride." She moved closer, her aura radiating superiority, as if daring him to show weakness. The nobles surrounding her leaned in, expecting a reaction, an apology, a stumble, a nervous breakdown. His response was simple. He took a single step forward, and the entire hall seemed to notice the shift. He didn't attack, didn't provoke. He merely positioned himself at the center, calm and steady, his posture neutral yet unyielding. It was not defiance in the way she expected. It was not fear, it was patience. For a moment's composure faltered. She had mocked countless visitors, conquered rivals, and subdued armies with her intellect and skill. Yet this human, he did not respond the way anyone had. The unpredictability unsettled her. The room felt colder, even the air seemed to hold its breath. Days turned into a routine that no one could fully predict. Attended councils where alien politics were discussed in a language he struggled to follow. Yet he listened, intently absorbing the patterns, the underlying power structures, the subtle hints of alliances and rivalries. The more he learned, the more quietly strategic he became. Each small act, a careful question, a well-timed observation, built a network of influence that the nobles did not see coming. One evening, during a lavish banquet, the princess could not resist her usual taunting. "Tell me, human," she said, lifting a glass that glimmered with a luminescent drink. "Do you ever feel like you are swimming in waters far too deep for you to understand?" Her smile was sharp, her gaze piercing. Around them, the court chuckled politely, anticipating some embarrassment. But only smiled faintly, a subtle acknowledgement without submission. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "but even the deepest waters can teach a swimmer to survive." His words were soft, almost humble, yet they carried weight. The room fell into a brief, stunned silence. Smile twitched, and for the first time, doubt flickered in her eyes. She tried to mask it with another laugh, but it was uneven. He had not attacked her pride directly, yet his calm resilience had pierced it more than mockery ever could. That night explored the palace corridors again, moving through shadowed halls where servants whispered of a human who refused to be humiliated. He observed staff, learning their routines, noting small frustrations and hidden tensions. Each detail he committed to memory. It was subtle, almost invisible work, but human ingenuity often thrived in ways that aliens could not immediately comprehend. Meanwhile, sat in her chamber, restless. She could not understand him, and the unpredictability gnawed at her. He did not react with fear, nor did he beg for acceptance. He merely existed on his own terms, calmly challenging a world built to dominate him. She had faced countless adversaries, yet none had unsettled her like this human. Silent strength began to ripple outward in unexpected ways. Nobles who once mocked him found themselves curious. Scholars, initially dismissive, paused to listen to his insights. Guards who expected weakness began to regard him with quiet respect. Without raising a hand in anger, without making a sound of triumph, his human essence, the resilience, the patience, the subtle brilliance, began to shift the dynamics of the entire palace. And for all her arrogance and pride, realized that she could not ignore him forever. The human was no ordinary visitor. He was a force quietly reshaping her perception, challenging assumptions she had held for her entire life. And the thought unsettled her more than any defeat ever could. A week passed, and the palace had begun to change in subtle ways that no one could immediately explain. Moved like a shadow among the corridors, unseen but always present. He spoke little, yet when he did, his words carried clarity that cut through layers of unnecessary protocol. Nobles who had once whispered their mockery now paused, caught between disbelief and fascination. Even began noticing small shifts, small glances that lingered longer than politeness demanded, subtle hesitation before dismissing his words. The turning point came on the morning of the Council of Advancement, a gathering where scholars and strategists proposed new policies for expansion. Attended, as always, listening intently. The discussion was complex, filled with alien terminology, calculations that seemed impossible, and predictions that only a mind trained in sciences could follow. Did not interrupt. He waited, observing the mistakes, the assumptions, and the biases in their plans. Then he spoke. His voice was steady, quiet, yet every word landed like a stone thrown into a still pond. "If you redirect energy from the outer colonies into the research sectors first," he said, "you will increase efficiency by nearly 17%. Your current plan risks stagnation." The room froze. Eyes widened. Aliens who had devoted decades to policy felt the weight of a human mind dissecting their expertise with perfect accuracy. His reaction was immediate. She rose from her seat, her emerald eyes blazing. "How dare you?" she began, but held her gaze without flinching. He did not challenge her personally. He challenged the assumptions, the flawed logic, the arrogance that often blinded even the minds. For the first time, the princess saw him not as an object to mock, but as a mind unlike any she had encountered. The council erupted into debate, some outraged, others impressed. His quiet analysis had shaken centuries of routine, and the palace buzzed with tension. Yet he did not claim victory. He did not demand acknowledgement. He had planted a seed of doubt in the minds of the most powerful beings and that was enough. Later in the gardens confronted him. Her steps were purposeful, her expression unreadable. "Do you enjoy humiliating everyone here with your human cleverness?" she asked, voice tight with a mixture of curiosity and anger. Looked at her calm as ever and said nothing for a moment. Silence hung between them, thick and electric. "I do not seek to humiliate," he finally said, his tone gentle yet firm. "I only speak what is true. If it challenges you, that is not my doing. It is simply observation." His words were simple, but they carried a weight she could not easily dismiss. She turned away, struggling with a feeling she did not understand, admiration mixed with frustration. In the following days, his presence began to shift the palace in ways that could neither control nor predict. Guards approached him for advice on tactics, scholars sought his insight on experiments, and minor nobles who had once sneered at him now deferred with cautious respect. Had not forced his influence. It had grown silently, steadily, like roots spreading beneath the surface. Noticed another change, herself. She found her thoughts drifting to him in ways that unsettled her. She had mocked him, assumed him weak, and yet his calm strength lingered in her mind. At times, she caught herself replaying his quiet gestures, the tilt of his head, the unwavering steadiness in his eyes. She had faced threats from across the galaxy, yet this human unsettled her far more than any army or rival ever had. One evening, during a rare moment of solitude, walked the palace's highest terrace. The twin moons bathed him in silver light, and he watched the city below, alive with alien life, unaware of the subtle shifts he had inspired. He did not feel pride. He felt determination, had its power, its beauty, and its arrogance, but humans had something it lacked: resilience, patience, and the courage to remain true in the face of mockery. That was his strength, and it would carry him through what was coming. Watched from her own window, hidden in the shadows. She did not fully understand why her chest tightened when she thought of him, why the calmness in his gaze haunted her thoughts. She had mocked him, underestimated him, and yet he had begun to quietly alter the palace and her perception, without a single raised hand. For the first time, feared a human might truly surpass her, not in combat or intellect alone, but in the subtle power of being unshakable. And that fear, unfamiliar and raw, began to awaken something she had never admitted: a grudging respect, mixed with an emotion she refused to name. The palace was restless that morning. Rumors of insight had spread like wildfire. Nobles whispered in hushed tones, questioning how a human, so small, so fragile-seeming, could influence decisions with precision they themselves had spent decades mastering. Who had once viewed him as a curiosity at best and a fool at worst, found her pride challenged in ways she had never anticipated. It began with a minor crisis. A supply convoy from the outer colonies had been delayed due to a sudden storm, threatening to destabilize the palace's carefully calculated resources. Panicked, debating solutions, their voices overlapping in confusion. His first instinct was to assert control, to command a plan with swift authority. but standing silently at the edge of the room, shook his head ever so slightly, his calm presence immediately drawing attention. He stepped forward, his voice soft yet clear. The convoy is intact, but delayed. If we reallocate the nearby reserves temporarily, the colonies will remain supplied without interruption. The storm will pass and the convoy can resume its route. No panic is necessary. A hush fell over the council chamber. Blinked, stunned. Not only had he diagnosed the problem, he had solved it in a manner that preserved resources and avoided panic. A wave of murmurs rose, some in admiration, some in disbelief. Did not bask in the recognition. He simply turned, his posture steady, and resumed his silent observation. Later that day, confronted him in the palace gardens, her usual composure cracked by frustration. "Do you enjoy undermining the system? Do you revel in making me look incompetent?" Her words were sharp, but her voice betrayed an undercurrent of respect she refused to admit. Looked at her steadily. "I do not seek to undermine anyone. I only respond to what I observe. Humans survive not by arrogance, but by understanding the situation and acting where others hesitate." His gaze was calm, unwavering, and it struck her harder than any insult could. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Words failed her. For the first time, she saw him not as a human to mock, but as a presence she could not ignore. That night wandered the corridors alone, the palace unusually quiet. She found herself thinking of him repeatedly, the way he moved, the way he listened, the quiet decisiveness he displayed without ever raising his voice. It was not strength measured in power or titles, she realized. It was something deeper, something almost alien in its resilience, yet human in its simplicity. Meanwhile, did not stop. He studied the palace routines, the inefficiencies, the hidden tensions between officials, and he acted quietly to correct them. A misplaced report was delivered on time. A strategic decision prevented unnecessary loss. A misunderstanding between allies was silently resolved before it escalated. No one noticed the hands guiding these small changes, except those few observant enough to see the subtle shifts. Days passed, and his irritation began to transform into fascination. She watched him in council, in the training halls, even in the garden, always observing, always learning. The human who had once seemed insignificant now moved through her world like a silent current, shaping it without noise or force. She hated how much she admired his quiet competence. One evening, a minor fire broke out in the eastern wing of the palace near the archives. Guards rushed in, but panic had begun to spread. Calm as always, assessed the situation and directed the response. He coordinated with precision, ensuring no lives were lost and damage was minimal. Arrived shortly after, expecting chaos, but instead found order. She watched as he moved among the guards and attendants, calm, collected, decisive. For the first time, she felt a twinge of fear, not for herself, but for the palace she had always controlled. Here was a human, quiet and unassuming, whose presence alone commanded respect and action. She had mocked him once. She had believed he was nothing. And yet he had silently demonstrated a strength she could not match through titles or training alone. Later, alone in her chambers, stared at the twin moons reflecting in her window. She realized that she had been wrong to judge him by appearances. Humans, she now understood, possessed a quiet, relentless power. It was patience. It was resilience. It was the courage to act decisively while others faltered, and embodied it entirely. That night she could not sleep. She thought of him constantly, the human who had entered her palace, endured her mockery, and silently reshaped the court without ever raising his voice. The realization unsettled her more than any enemy ever could. For the first time in her life, understood that underestimating a human was the gravest mistake she could make, and that this mistake might already have cost her more than she imagined. The palace buzzed with anticipation. A delegation from a distant system had arrived, bringing with them demands, requests, and subtle threats. The council convened in urgency, and for the first time, presence in such a critical moment would be tested in full view of everyone. Nobles whispered, expecting blunders from the human, while watched silently, her curiosity mixed with restrained tension. The delegation was led by a towering alien with a reputation for sharpness and intimidation. He began immediately, his words dripping with condescension. "Sufficiency is admirable, but we question your capacity to handle the expanding sectors. A human here," he sneered, eyes briefly resting on, "should hardly influence matters beyond entertainment." Laughter rippled through the room. His lips twitched, a reflexive urge to join in that she quickly stifled. Remained still, almost invisible in his calm. He studied, analyzing the nuances of his speech, the hesitations, the overconfidence. Then, when the council seemed trapped in confusion and reactive statements, spoke. His voice was soft, almost understated, yet it carried authority. Your concerns are valid if observed from the wrong perspective. However, if resources are redistributed strategically, the sectors will stabilize while maintaining growth. You will see efficiency rise without risk to your interests. A pause filled the chamber. His brows furrowed, caught off guard. A human whom he had assumed weak and insignificant had just dismantled the perceived threat with precision. The room leaned in, holding its breath. His calm eyes met, unwavering and clear. It was not arrogance, it was certainty rooted in knowledge and observation. His gaze narrowed. She felt a strange mix of pride and frustration. The human she had mocked was commanding respect without raising his voice, without arrogance, without seeking recognition. It was infuriating and yet undeniably impressive. She realized she had underestimated him entirely, and now the court was witnessing the truth unfold. Recovering from the initial shock, attempted to assert dominance. And if your calculations fail, human, who bears responsibility? His tone was sharp, challenging, did not flinch. He met Sclare steadily. Responsibility lies with those who act recklessly without observation. The strategy I suggest minimizes risk because it accounts for variables ignored in traditional assessment. Execution is key, and precaution is non-negotiable. The room fell silent. Nobles who had doubted now watched in awe. Even, who prided herself on seeing through deceit and strategy, felt an unfamiliar hesitation. His calm rationality, combined with human ingenuity, had turned a potentially tense confrontation into a controlled solution. The delegation, unable to match his precision, gradually conceded. Eyes once sharp with dominance now betrayed reluctant respect. He nodded curtly, signaling acceptance of recommendations. The tension in the chamber dissolved, replaced with murmurs of astonishment. Had not demanded authority, he had quietly earned it. Later, in the quiet of the palace gardens, confronted him privately. You do not fight with anger nor with pride, yet you command more respect than any of my court. How do you do this? Her voice was low, tinged with awe and frustration. Looked at her, calm as always. I observe, I listen, I act where necessary. Humans survive because we adapt even when underestimated. Strength is not always loud. It is often quiet, persistent, and deliberate. His words were simple, but they carried a depth that unsettled her. She had never met anyone who embodied power in such subtlety. Turned away, struggling with the realization. The human she had mocked had shifted the balance of respect in the entire palace with silence and calculated actions. Her assumptions about superiority, about control, about her unshakable position, each was quietly challenged by his presence. That night, as the palace slept, walked alone along the terrace. The stars stretched endlessly above him, distant and cold. He reflected on the day's events, not with pride, but with resolve. He had begun to change the perception of humans not through force, but through quiet competence and patience. And that influence, he knew, would ripple far beyond the palace walls. Inside her chambers, stared at the same stars, her mind restless. For the first time, she wondered what it truly meant to be underestimated, and what it would mean if she could never underestimate him again. The human had endured ridicule, navigated alien customs, and quietly demonstrated a strength she could not ignore. She felt an unfamiliar shift inside her, a mixture of respect, intrigue, and a subtle fear she refused to name. Silent strength had begun to ripple through the palace in ways no one, not even, had anticipated. And the human's presence promised that the world they knew would never be the same. Weeks passed, and the palace had begun to hum with a new rhythm. Silent influence was evident in every corner, minor disputes resolved before escalating, inefficiencies corrected without notice, and a subtle yet profound respect growing among the court. Even those who had once mocked him now approached cautiously, curiosity tempered by admiration. But it was who felt the deepest change. She had never admitted it to anyone, not even herself, but she watched him constantly. The human who had arrived as a curiosity had become something she could not dismiss, a presence that challenged her pride and reshaped her perception. At first, she had tried to ignore it, telling herself he was clever, yes, but only a human, temporary, and limited. Yet every action, every calm decision he made continued to chip away at her certainty. One morning, an urgent message arrived from the outer colonies. A rogue faction had attempted to seize control of a strategic outpost. Panic began to spread among the nobles, their reactions frantic and disorganized. Instinctively wanted to command the solution herself, but before she could act, stepped forward. He spoke softly, but his words carried authority that demanded attention. The outpost is isolated but not irretrievable. If we deploy a precise strike team while reinforcing communication channels, the faction can be contained with minimal loss. Hesitation will create chaos. Decisive action will restore order. His plan was meticulous. Listened, realizing that his understanding was not limited to theory. He saw the patterns, the variables, the human and alien factors alike. She gave him the nod to proceed and coordinated silently, guiding the troops and strategists without raising his voice or asserting dominance. Within hours, the outpost was secure and the rogue faction neutralized. The palace erupted in whispers of astonishment, had acted decisively, effectively, and without fanfare. Watched him, her heart pounding, not from fear, but from a growing recognition that she had been wrong to mock him. This human had endured her ridicule, navigated alien politics, and silently transformed the palace with his competence. Later, in the quiet of the palace garden, approached him, her voice softer than she expected. You handle things differently than anyone I have ever known. You do not demand respect, yet you earn it in ways no one else can. Looked at her, calm and unflinching. Respect is not demanded, he said simply. It is given when actions speak louder than words. Humans survive because we understand when to act, when to observe, and when to remain silent. You have strength, princess, but silence and patience are powerful allies. She stared at him, unsettled by the truth in his words. For the first time, she considered that her pride, her assumptions about superiority had blinded her. She had mocked him, expected him to fail, yet he had consistently proven otherwise. And now, she realized, he had become indispensable, not just to the palace, but to her own understanding of leadership and strength. That evening found herself wandering the halls, thinking of. She replayed moments in her mind, the calm in his gaze during council debates, the precision with which he had solved crises, the way he had moved through the palace without seeking glory. She admitted reluctantly that she admired him. More than that, she feared underestimating him again. Meanwhile, remained consistent in his quiet vigilance. He never sought praise, never demanded attention, and never flaunted his achievements. Instead, he acted, observed, and guided. He understood the subtle ways in which influence could be exercised, and he understood the power of restraint. The court had begun to change, but true work had only just begun. Could not stop thinking about him. Her mockery had turned to fascination, her pride tempered by admiration, and her understanding of humans expanded in ways she had never imagined. The human she had once dismissed was now a figure who commanded thought, subtly shifted action, and unsettled the very foundations of her assumptions. And as he walked the terrace under the twin moons, remained silent and steady, unaware of how deeply he had begun to alter the princess's heart and mind. He was not seeking to change anyone. He was simply being himself. Yet in doing so, he had become more than a visitor. He had become a force no one could ignore, a quiet power reshaping a palace and challenging an entire worldview. The night was still, but change had already taken root, and unassuming and steadfast was at the center of it all, a human presence that would never forget. The palace was quieter than usual that morning. Chambers were empty, his personal effects gone. No announcement had been made. Nobles, guards, and attendants wandered the halls, confused and murmuring in disbelief. The human who had silently reshaped the court, who had endured mockery, who had earned respect without demanding it, had simply left. Stood in her chamber, staring at the empty space where he had slept. Her heart felt heavier than she expected. Questions swirled in her mind, unspoken and unrelenting. Why had he left without warning? Was it disappointment, duty, or something else entirely? Her pride told her to remain composed, but her chest tightened, a strange ache she did not recognize. She had admired him. She had respected him. She had, against her better judgment, begun to care. The council gathered, bewildered. "Where is he?" one noble demanded, voice sharp with disbelief. "The human, the one who guided the outer colonies, the one who corrected our mistakes, gone?" Others shook their heads. No one had seen him leave. No one knew how or when. The presence that had commanded subtle power reshaped perception and shifted the balance of respect was now absent, leaving a silence heavier than any shout. Unable to contain herself, left her chamber and descended the terrace toward the palace gates. The cold morning air bit at her skin, but she barely noticed. She had to see for herself to confirm the truth. When she reached the outer path, she saw the faint silhouette of walking away from the palace. His figure was steady, calm, yet resolute. He did not look back. He never had looked back. For a long moment, she simply watched. The human she had mocked, underestimated, and now revered carried with him the quiet strength that had defined every moment of his time in. She realized with a sudden clarity that his departure was not an insult, nor a failure, nor a retreat. It was a lesson. Humans, she finally understood, did not always remain where they were needed. They acted, influenced, and moved on with dignity and tact. His mind raced through memories of his actions. The calm precision during the council debates, the quiet orchestration of the palace's crises, the way he had endured her mockery without anger, the subtle brilliance that had reshaped her perception of power. Every small gesture now seemed monumental, every quiet decision now monumental, and she understood what the nobles had yet to fully grasp. Influence would linger long after he had gone. As the palace slowly returned to routine, found herself standing on the terrace for hours, watching the horizon where it vanished. A strange mixture of emotions churned inside her: respect, longing, regret, and awe. She realized that humans, though seemingly fragile, could carry a quiet power unmatched by titles or technology. They could endure mockery, navigate alien worlds, and leave a mark so indelible that even the proudest could not ignore it. Her own heart, once hardened by pride and certainty, had shifted. She admitted, silently and reluctantly, that she had been wrong about him. She had underestimated not just his skill or intelligence, but his essence, the patient, steadfast, and unyielding spirit that defined humans in the face of adversity. His footsteps faded into the distance, leaving only the echo of his presence. Closed her eyes and whispered, though she knew he would never hear, "You have changed everything without even trying." The palace, the court, and even the princess herself had been altered by a human who had neither demanded attention nor sought glory. His legacy was not in the battles fought, nor the councils swayed, nor the crises averted. It was in the quiet reminder of what it meant to endure, to observe, and to act with unwavering patience. By the time the sun rose fully over, the story of the human's silent departure had spread. Nobles debated his brilliance, scholars marveled at his insight, and simply understood. She understood that greatness was not always loud, and that respect could be earned in silence, with quiet courage and indomitable spirit. Was gone, yet his influence remained. And in that absence, the palace, and the alien princess who had once mocked him, would never forget the human who had altered everything simply by being himself.